Hi, welcome to Basement Bible Breakdown. My mother's basement with her ugly paneling, as some people said, and find anything they can to mock me about, which I'm sure there's plenty of things, but I am not here to present myself in some fake atmosphere to try to make myself look more legitimate because I have a perfect office. The point is you need to hear the words as I offer up an apology, and you can measure whether what I'm speaking is truth or not. So in these videos here in this series, I'm responding back to Jason, who said he wouldn't deal with futurists, but then he did anyway, because he's got a couple of questions he wants answered. And so we're going to deal with some of his comments, and then we're going to get directly into, in the next video probably, of his direct question that he wants answered. And so if people want to go straight to that one, you can. But and here I'm going to address some of the things he said. So here he is commenting and going to state what I believe and what I've said so far in the other video. So it says, Stephen is too stupid to realize what he is saying. Let's see what he said above. He said this: all men are sinful and sin, whether they are under the law or not. All men need to be saved. Now, Paul said this. Now, this is his rebuttal. Sin is not imputed where there is no law. There is no transgression without the law. The law gives strength. So sin took an opportunity by the law and brought death. So Jason says, Paul disagrees with Stephen and shows us repeatedly that sin is not charged to anyone without the only law in the story, which was exclusively given to Israel. And of course, when we talk about Israel, we're talking about the whole nation. And then, of course, I've redefined what Gentiles is. They're not law-abiding Israelites, as he said before. And it comes from verse 14 of Romans 2. Let's make this clear. And this is what I talked about, I said I would mention before. See, he defines Gentiles as non-law-abiding Israelites. And here's our problem. Even if they are non-law-abiding, they're still Israelites. Israelites were giving the law. Other people were not. Only descendants of Abraham were given the law. All 12 tribes were given the law. Here's verse 14, and it says it very clearly. For when Gentiles who do not have the law by nature do what the law requires, they are a law to themselves, even though they do not have the law. Now, I want you to get that and grasp that and understand the power of that and how it contradicts Jason's comments completely. See, Jason says that Gentiles are non-law-abiding Israelites. But Paul said Gentiles do not have the law. He didn't say they were not law-abiding or non-law-abiding. He said they were never given the law in the first place. So in this, we can completely show that Jason does not understand what Gentiles are. So when you look up the definition of Gentiles, it says non-Jew, which means other nations, foreigners, somebody who is not a descendant of Abraham. It means they are not coming from either the northern kingdom or the southern kingdom. They are not Israelites. They are not of Judah. They have nothing to do with anything about Israel or Abraham or any of the 12 tribes. Okay, they are foreigners. They are people from other nations. Now let's look at Colossians 1. So let's look at the context of this whole passage that he's going to bring into question here in a bit. In Colossians 1, 26 and 27, it says, to make the word of God fully known, the mysteries hidden for ages and generations, and now revealed to his saints. So what is this mystery that is being revealed by Paul in this New Testament? It is simply this, that now Gentiles are being included. Well, if we call Gentiles in the Old Testament other nations, and they are unclean according to Peter in Acts chapter 10, then these are non-Israelites, non-Jews, period. None of them have anything to do with it. This is the mystery that's being revealed by Paul, that now God is going to include other nations into the gospel message, and they are going to be grafted in. when Paul is making his arguments through Romans, he makes the statement about Jews and Gentiles, that all have sinned, there is none righteous, no, not one. And the wages of sin is death. Now let's get down to some specifics. Verse 12 in Romans 2, he says, for all who have sinned without the law will also perish without the law. And all who have sinned under the law will be judged by the law. Here's your two groups. Gentiles, Jews, okay? He says nobody can be judged, nobody can be imputed with sin who does not have the law. If they don't have the law, then they are not sinners. Therefore, they cannot be imputed with sin without having the law. Those are Jason's words. But what does it say? For all who have sinned without the law. So how do people sin without the law? You have to have some kind of law that says that you are a sinner. So what's the difference being made? Verse 14. Pay attention to this very closely. For when Gentiles who do not have the law by nature do what the law requires, they are law to themselves, even though they do not have the law. And what did Jason say? Gentiles are what? Non-law abiding Israelites. All Israelites were given the law. Here's your definition for Gentiles. Gentiles are people who were never given the law. Plain and simple. You can't be any more than that. So everybody who was without the law of Moses will perish because they were still sinners. Why? It shows that the works of the law were written on their hearts, while the conscience bears witness to it. They are conflicting. So what is that law that's written on their hearts? That is what we call the moral law. The moral law is knowing the difference between right and wrong. That was from the garden. How do we know it comes from the garden? Sin came to all men from the garden. It says in Romans 5, I believe, 6, therefore, just as sin came into the world through one man, and death through sin, and so death spread to all men because all men have sinned. Do you understand this grasp? He's not making the distinction between Jews, Gentiles, or anything else. He said sin came into the world through one man, Adam. So death through sin has come to all men. All men die, therefore they all come from Adam. They're all sinners. So pay attention here real close. Verse 13. For sin indeed was in the world before the law of Moses was given. Do you get the power of that? Sin was in the world before the law was given. But then sin is not accounted where there is no law. So meaning that people cannot be accused and say you broke the law if there is no law. So if he said that people are sinners and they are sinful and death spread to all men, therefore there was a law. What was that law? The law, the moral law. Do by nature what the law requires. They are law to themselves. They don't have the law of Moses. They are law to themselves, meaning their conscience will tell them what is right and wrong. That is the law he's talking about that they have to follow. And they were supposed to follow people who were not Israelites, who were never given the law. And what does it say? Gentiles who do not have the law. I can't make that any clearer. So death reigned from Adam to Moses, even those who were sinning were not like the transgressions of Adam, and is a type of the one that is to come. So what he's saying there, death reigned from Adam to Moses. Why? Because they were a law to themselves. They knew what was right and wrong, and those that do not have the law still perished without the law because they sinned according to what they knew was right and wrong. Now, he went on to say, Whitless then said, the old covenant was designed to point to Christ who would come and take the sins of the world for those who believe. And that's what I said is true. And I pointed out, for God so loved the world that he gave his only son, that whoever believes in him should not perish, but have eternal life. Perish, there it is. Those, what? For all who have sinned without the law will also, what? perish without the law. So what are we saying here? God loved the world. He gave his only son that whoever believes in him should not perish, but have everlasting life. Romans 2:12, for all who have sinned without the law will perish without the law, and all who have sinned under the law will be judged by the law. So there's a judging that comes upon both foreigners and those who are descendants of Israel. Now, here's the thing. He answered back and said, but Paul said, Christ was the end of the law to those who believe. He was born into the law to redeem those that were under the law. And Jesus said, I come only for the lost sheep of Israel. Clearly that world was those that were under the law, which Paul defines clearly for us in Romans 3:19. Yet, let me point this out. Here's the distinction. Yes, Jesus came to those that were under the law because he came to redeem those that were under the law. So that means he died for everybody that was under the law. Paul goes on to say and says what? After Christ, all that, his death, burial, and resurrection, he said what? For 1 Corinthians 9:20. To the Jews, law-practicing people, I became like a Jew to win those over. To those under the law, I became like one that was under law. And here's the key point. Though I myself is not under the law. Now, he was a Pharisee and a Jew, but he is saying here, I am no longer under the law. So we're showing a distinction here between what Jesus did and what was he doing and what happened afterwards. Now, here's the distinction further. He had 12 disciples. He sent them out in the world to reach Gentiles, people who did not have the law, to include them into this. Because why? All men are sinners. And Christ died for all men, whether you were under the covenant or not. You were all sinners. He came so that all men can be saved, even those who are not under the law. 1 Corinthians 9:21, the following verse. To them that are under the law, as they were under the law, whereas myself not under the law, Pharisees, Jews. He came to be, to die. So the law ended. So if there was no longer, if the law ended, then they were no longer obligated to keep the law of Moses as required in the Old Covenant. Then the Old Covenant ended on the cross when he died for all sin. So we'll get into that in the next video, theologically, why that is completely wrong and inconsistent to say that Jesus only was for people that were Israelites. Because now in the New Testament, the Gentiles, people who are not given the law, non-descendants, were also now included. He goes on to Romans 11 and says some more things. But I think I'm going to stop here at this point, and this is part 2. And we'll come back with part 3, but I want you to digest this first part and understand it. Look at Romans 2, how he says that Gentiles are not under the law. And those who without the law will perish because he still calls them sinners. And that is because all men are sinners. Sin reigned from Adam to Moses. Well, how did they become sinners? How were they sinners if there was no law of Moses? How were they called sinners? And he basically argued that they were sinners because they know the moral law. They know the difference between right and wrong, and they did what they know in their heart was wrong. That was accounted to them as sin. That was imputed to them because it was not the law of Moses, but the moral law that condemned them. Okay, I think I have made this very clear enough. And if Jason wants to respond, I probably won't respond any further to him because this is the fundamental issue for IO, is how you define what a Gentile is. Gentiles were not given the law, period. They never had the law, so they cannot be called non-law abiding. If you don't have the law, you don't have to abide to it. All right, I think that's clear enough. Thank you for watching. Something to wrestle with, to look at that Romans 2, read it through all the way up through 5 and 6 in those chapters, as he explains these distinctions between Jews and Greeks, and then eventually breaks it down that there is no more distinction between it, because all people are saved by the same thing, faith in God, not in obedience to a law. All right, you have a good night. We'll catch you on the flip side, and we'll see you later. Thank you.